Okay, this video is going to take us through an introduction to loops. Today we're going to talk about the while loops, and we're just going to get started on that. And so as we look at our notes here, we can see that we have what's called loop structure. And so you're going to find some similarities between loop structure and the if structure that we dealt with in the previous chapter. What is a loop? A loop is a structure that allows the repeated execution. It allows repeated execution of a block of code. And so, if you look at the down here, we have a picture of a while loop. If you were to look at this code, you should be able to tell me what block of code is going to be repeated, because there's really only one block of code, and that's the block of code in between these two curly braces. So this block of code right here is what's going to be repeated. So hello, 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 it can be repeated as many times as you want it to. An iteration is one execution of a loop body. And so we might as well say this now. This is called a loop body, and this would be good to write this on your notes here. This is a loop body. So before we called it, the block of code below the if statement an if clause, and then we had an else if clause. But this is a body, kind of like the main method has a body, the body of the main method. And so, anyways, so an iteration. So if it iterates, that means it's going through the loop once. If you have 3 iterations, that means it executes this loop 3 times. 3 types of loops are: there's a while loop, which is what we're going to deal with first. And then there is what's called a for loop, F-O-R, for loop. And then another one that's called do, or do while. So it can be called a do while loop or a do loop, either one. And the do is spelled D-O. Now loops can be definite or indefinite. So the first one, it can be definite, like this word right here. Or it can be indefinite. So just put the IN before definite and you got it. Now what makes a definite loop? A definite loop is, in this case, we're going to talk about a definite while loop. It executes a block of code a predetermined number of times. So use the programmer, decide in your code, I want this particular block of code to be repeated 6 times. Or 4 times, or 27 times. So you decide. But there's going to be other loops, other times where you're going to write a loop when you will not know how many times it will iterate, because it will stop in a way that you won't know when that's going to take place. So we're dealing with a definite while loop where you as the programmer control how many times the loop will iterate. And so here we're going to go through this code right now, and this is being very important that you track the code just like what I'm doing here. We will do this on an assignment later on that will help us prepare for another assignment, or actually an exercise, and then that will help us prepare for the assignment. That is chapter 4a. And so the first line, if I asked you then, what does the compiler do? You should know what it does right here. It sets up a memory location named count right here, and reserves a memory location, and then it assigns a 1 to it. The next line of code says while count is less than 4. Now, if I were to ask you what we call this statement right here, you should be able to say it's a while statement. It's just like you have an if statement starts with an if, while statement starts with a while, and it also contains a Boolean expression, which we already know that. And then we know also that count is a variable call. And being that variable call, then it's called the value of count, which is 1. And what does the compiler do when it sees a Boolean expression? Well, we already should know that, and that is evaluating this expression to be true or false. Well, 1 is less than 4, so it is true. Just like in the if or if-else structure, if the Boolean expression is true, then you go into the block of code below it and it gets executed. So in this case, this block of code has 2 lines of code. This is called the loop body. And so now we're going to enter and we're going to iterate the loop body here once. We're going to execute it one time. And so it tells us to print hello. So it tells the compiler actually to print hello. So it does that. And I forgot that I actually, oh, that's weird. Here it is. That I actually forgot. I can type this in here, makes it go better. So it prints hello. And then the next line is the line that we're not familiar yet with, and that is count plus plus. Now count plus plus is actually a shortcut increment well, the plus plus is an increment operator, but this is a shortcut for incrementing. So count plus plus increments. We can say it increments count by 1. All right, that's what this means. Now, this is instead of going count is assigned count plus 1. That's another way you could do this, but we're doing a shortcut now. We're going to learn the other shortcuts as well in this chapter. But so that we just use count plus plus, mean to add 1 to the count. And so here we are. We changed the 1 to a 2, so it's been changed to a 2. Now we come to an all-important line of code, which is an ending curly brace. Well, this ending curly brace actually speaks to us. It tells us something to do. If it tells us something, it tells us this. It says end of loop. That's not all. It says end of loop, return to while. So it actually tells us that this is the end of something and we need to return to something, someplace we've already been. And so what it does then is it tells us that now we have to go back up to the while statement. And we got to check this out. Okay, I'm going to just delete all this stuff in here. It's a mess. So it does go back to while. And it does the Boolean expression again, like it usually does. And count, however, this time is not 1. It is now 2 because it's been updated. And so we'd now say is 2 less than 4? And of course it is, so we jump in the loop and we go through that body again. So now we're on our second iteration, and of course it prints hello again, and it also increments the count variable by 1. And so this now becomes 3. And then we go down to 10, says end of loop, return to while. So we go back up to while. But now the Boolean expression here, the count is now 3. So now we're checking, is 3 less than 4? It still is. So now we're going to jump into the loop and execute the loop a third time. So this will be its third iteration. And so we're going to print hello again. And then count is going to get updated or incremented again, so now it's 4. Now you might say, well, 4 makes it false, so we got to stop. Well, not yet. You don't stop until the Boolean expression is evaluated. And right now we're still on this line. Okay, so we just executed that line. We go down here, and and there may even be other code after this count plus plus type line. So you don't want to just say, okay, this is where we stop. You could have more code, but at any rate, we go to the end of the loop and we return to while, and now it says 4 is less than 4, which is false. And so now we're done with the loop. The loop stops. We've iterated 3 times, and now we kick out of the loop and we go into the next line following the body of the loop. And so in this case, it is going to be printing the word done. Okay, so that's how this works. That's how a loop works. You'll be expected to be able to trace code like this, only with more complicated problems as we move on. Especially today, I'll give you a little bit more of a complicated problem. So what we want to do now is we want to go ahead and go to the next line, our next stuff our next stuff. We want to go to the stuff down here. So definition of the definite while loop terminology. That's what we're going to deal with. So this will help you talk, help me talk, help us understand each other when we use the same vernacular or vocabulary as it comes to loops. And so LCV is a very important word, actually acronym. And so this stands for loop. That was not smart. And so I'll try this again. This stands for loop control variable. And so if you notice, we're going to use LCV instead of typing loop control variable all the time. And so we just want to make sure you understand that. So we have a loop control variable. Well, if I were to ask you, what does a loop control variable, what do you think a loop control variable? You actually should be able to answer me right now. And that is, if you look at the name, it says loop control variable. Well, so it's a variable that controls the loop. And you should be able to tell, well, what variable? Well, there's only one variable up here. And so that variable, of course, is the count variable. And so you can see here that it did control the variable, because once count became 4, it stopped the loop. And before that, when it was 1 and when it was 2 and when it was 3, it then told the compiler to go and do and execute the loop. So it is actually controlling the loop. Think about this for a second. What if we didn't update this? So what if it stayed at 1 the entire time? What would happen? Well, what would happen is then, and you should be able to answer this, if it stays at 1, it's never going to stop. So it just goes on forever, and then you have to click on that end button in JGrasp to stop the program, because it'll never reach the 4, which stops the loop. So you can see how that control, or that count variable, is actually controlling the loop. And so let's go on. So the first, number 1, loop control variable declared. Now there's 5 parts. Basically, there's 3 main parts of a loop, of a definite while loop, plus there's 2 curly braces. And so the first part of major part of a definite loop, while loop, is the loop control variable gets initialized. So number 1 is loop control variable initialized. And obviously we know what that means already. It's basically when a variable is assigned a value when it's declared. And so or just assigned a value is good. And so number 1, it's initialized, it's declared and assigned. And that's what happened on line 1. So, and once we see that, then that's not going to change, and its job is already done as far as initialization goes. The other 2 parts, though, those are going to take place and be repeated. So the next thing that happens is while in that line 3, you see count again. Here's that loop control variable. Well, up here it was initialized. Here we say it is tested. And so it's tested by its value is part of a Boolean expression. It gets evaluated to be true or false. And so it's controlling the loop, because if it's true, it executes the loop. If it's false, the loop stops. All right, so this is, of course, in a Boolean expression, number 2. Now, number 3. the third part, major part, where do you see count again? Well, it's in line 8. And in line 8, we see that the count is incremented. Well, we call that, though, in general, because it's not always just incremented by 1, most of the time, but not all the time. So it's updated. We say it's updated. So it gets updated from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. It gets updated. And as we said before, if we were to eliminate the update, the loop would just go on forever. But as it continues, then eventually it stops the loop. So that's a very important part of a loop, is to have the thing that allows it to stop. All right, so we can say count is assigned count plus 1, or we can say count plus plus. This would be the recommended shortcut to use. Now, then you have the other two things are the beginning curly brace, and you have the ending curly brace. Remember, the ending curly brace says this, and so this is what you should write on that line in number 5. It says to us, it speaks to us and says, end of loop, return to while. And then finally, the bottom part here is some other terms that we use, and so those would be the loop body, which we've actually already labeled. All right, so we've labeled the loop body already, and then I've also I think I've used these terms. But if the Boolean expression is true, then what we do is we jump into the loop. Whoa, that's huge. Oh, that happens once in a while. And so we will just do this. So if it's true, Boolean expression is true, we jump into the loop. If the Boolean expression is false, we kick out of the loop. So those are terms that we use. And so that takes us through the introduction to loops. And then make sure, though, that you do the activity where you're actually going to trace a loop on our day 1 trace activity. And then that will help you prepare for the Chapter 4A assignment, where you're going to be tracing code again.